Look at some of the New York Times articles today. Fiona Hill, I don't know, Fiona Hill testifies fictions on Ukraine pushed by Trump help Russia. Okay. So it says a video Associated Press says in Washington, White House former top Europe and Russia experts sharply denounced what she called a fictional narrative embraced by President Trump and his Republican allies that the Ukraine, not Russia, interfered in 2016 elections, testifying that the claim at the center of the impeachment inquiry was a fabrication by Moscow that had harmed the United States. So it's testifying on the final day of the week's public impeachment hearing. The expert Fiona Hill tied Mr. Trump's pressure campaign on Ukraine to a dangerous effort by Russia to sow political divisions in the United States and undercut American diplomacy. Her testimony before the House Intelligence Committee was the implicit rebuke to the president's suggestions that he pressed Ukraine to investigate the theory that Kiev, rather than Moscow, undertook a concentrated campaign to meddle in the 2016 campaign. He was playing in Trump's hands before his own political gain. And it says here, Dr. Hill's account of how Mr. Trump's team carried out how she called a domestic political errand that diverged from his own administration's foreign policy amounted to a sharp, albeit indirect, criticism of the president she served, and it brought home the grave national security consequences of the effort. Says here, these fictions are harmful even if they are deployed for purely domestic political purposes, said Dr. Hill, a British-born daughter of a coal miner who became a United States citizen and co-wrote a lengthy book analyzing the psyche of President Vladimir Putin of Russia. It says here, the Russians, he said, deploy millions of dollars to weaponize our country, to our own political opposition, research and false narratives. When we are consumed by partisan rancor, we cannot combat these external forces as they seek to divide us against each another, degrade our institutions, and destroy the faith of the American people in our democracy. Both Dr. Hill and David Holmes, top aide in the United States Embassy in Kiev, testified in detail about what they understood to be a concerted campaign by the president and his allies, led by Rudolph W. Giuliani, his personal lawyer, to condition the White House meeting for Ukraine's president on his announcement of investigations that Mr. Trump wanted into the 2016 election claim and former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr. It says here, there's a long article. It says investigations for a meeting is how Dr. Hill described her understanding of the deal laid out by the president's inner circle, including Mr. Giuliani, Gordon D. Sondland, ambassador to the European Union, Mick Mulvaney, acting White House chief of staff. Under questioning from the Republican Counsel on the House Intelligence Committee, Dr. Hill says she confronted Ms. Sondland in July about his failure to coordinate with other members of the administration on his actions regarding Ukraine. She understood later that Mr. Sondland was part of a group of officials, along with Ms. Mulvaney, a Secretary of State of Mike Pompeo, who were being in a domestic political errand and we were being involved in national security foreign policy, and those two things had just diverged. Dr. Hill said she had told Mr. Sondland, at the time that this is all going to blow up. Mr. Holmes said it was his clear understanding at the end of August that Mr. Trump had froze $391 million in vital security aid to pressure Ukraine to commit to announcing an investigation into Mr. Biden and his family. The testimony came after Democrats sought to pull back the focus of the impeachment proceedings at the end of the 2 weeks of detail-heavy hearing focused on White House meetings, suspended security assistance for Ukraine, diplomatic exchanges, and plenty of obscure Ukrainian names. But they notched additional new information that could help bolster their case. Republicans, Republicans knowing that Dr. Hill's criticism was coming, used their opening remarks to try to blunt their attacks. Representative Devin Nunes of California, the panel's top Republican, said that his party did not doubt Russia's actions in 2016, but were open to the broader focus that Democrats were not. Needless to say, it's entirely possible for separate nations to engage in election meddling. At the time, and Republicans believe we should take meddling seriously by all foreign countries, Mr. Nunes said. 2017 American intelligence officials released a report concluding that Mr. Putin ordered a state-sponsored campaign to try to influence the 2016 presidential election. No evidence has emerged that there was a similar effort by Ukraine. Mr. Trump, who had responded to the proceedings in real time, took shots at Mr. Holmes Thursday morning, and his allies went after Dr. Hill as well. As Mr. Holmes testified, Mr. Trump wrote on Twitter that there was no way he could have heard what he claimed to have picked up a cell phone conversation between Mr. Trump and Mr. Sondland. Donald Trump Jr., the president's eldest son, wrote on Twitter that Dr. Hill only had an opinion to offer, not first-hand knowledge. Republicans have dismissed multiple witnesses as unelected bureaucrats, merely second-guessing the president's policy positions. Mr. Holmes said his assessment came after he drafted the Senate cable to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on behalf of William B. Taylor Jr., the top American diplomat in Ukraine, attempting to explain the importance of security assistance to Ukraine. By this point, Mr. Holmes said, my clear impression was that the security assistance hold was likely intended by the president either as an expression of dissatisfaction with the Ukrainians who had not yet agreed to the Burisma Biden investigation, or as an effort to increase the pressure on them to do so. Burisma is a Ukrainian energy company that employed Hunter Biden, the former presidential son, on its board. Mr. Holmes also offered a detailed account of the phone call between Mr. Trump and Gordon S. Sondland, his ambassador to the European Union in Kiev, in late July. The call took place a day after Mr. Trump directly asked Zelensky for the investigations. Ms. Holmes said he could overhear the president ask Mr. Sondland if Mr. Zelensky would conduct the inquiries he sought. Mr. Sondland assured him that he's going to do it, and that the Ukrainian leader would do anything you ask him to. Afterward, Mr. Holmes testified that the ambassador told him, Mr. President, told him Mr. Trump did not care for Ukraine, but only for the big things like the investigations. investigation. And it says a day after Mr. Sondland laid out an extensive campaign to secure the political investigations, both witnesses said they had zero doubt about what Mr. Trump and Mr. Giuliani were after Dr. Hill. And Mr. Holmes both testified that references to investigating Burisma by Mr. Giuliani and other government officials in Dr. Hill's words code for the Bidens. It says, asked by the Democratic Council for the Intelligence Committee whether anyone involved in the Ukraine matters the spring and summer would understand that as well. Mr. Holmes had a one-word answer: yes. Mr. Sondland and Kurt W. Volker, former special envoy to Ukraine, both said under oath this week that for many months they believed talk of Burisma was merely a reference to Mr. Trump's interest in eliminating rampant corruption in Ukraine, given the company's history. Dr. Hill also offered the most precise account to date of the inaugural White House meeting with Ukraine officials on July 10th. That ended abruptly with Mr. Sondland. After Mr. Sondland told visiting officials that they would need to commit to investigations Mr. Trump sought before getting a meeting with the president. John R. Bolton, then the National Security Advisor, stiffened visibly and sat back in his chair when Mr. Sondland made a comment apparently so disturbed by quickly head off the meeting. She said, after the meeting ended, Mr. Sondland explained precisely what he was up to. Dr. Hill testified referencing a deal to Mr. Mulvaney that he had an agreement, in quotes, and they had an agreement with Chief of Staff Mulvaney, and that in return for investigations, this meeting would get scheduled. She said, Thursday session capped 2 marathon weeks of investigation and impeachment hearings, the first in 2 decades, and the third such proceedings in modern history. Public sessions by turns gripping and grinding. The House Intelligence Committee has heard from a dozen witnesses who described how Mr. Trump and his allies inside and outside the government shunted aside official American policy toward Ukraine in favor of an unorthodox, politically charged campaign to secure the investigations that Mr. Trump sought. It says here, the former ambassador to Ukraine spoke of being smeared and ousted from her post because she ran afoul by Mr. Giuliani and his allies. The seasoned diplomat who reluctantly replaced her said he watched distraught, and then as the entire United States relationship with Ukraine was staked on the investigations with Ukrainians' lives and American foreign political policy interests as collateral damage. Then on Wednesday, Mr. Sondland testified on certain terms that there had been unclear quid quo pro at the highest levels of Mr. Trump's government linking at the White House meeting for Mr. Zelensky to investigations that everyone had known it. Says here, other witnesses from the White House, State Department, Defense Department spoke in unanimous opposition to Mr. Trump's decision to freeze security assistance. Now, they raised questions about the legality of withholding money appropriated by Congress. One of them, Laura Cooper, testified that Ukraine began inquiring about the assistance on July 25th, a month earlier than Republicans had insisted they knew. On the very same day, Mr. Trump called Mr. Trump's call with Mr. Zelensky. In the coming days, Congress will determine what response is appropriate. Representative Adam B. Schiff of California, Intelligence Committee Chairman, said, as he opened Thursday's hearing, quote, "It will be up to us to decide whether those acts are compatible with the office of the presidency. As lawmakers leave town for the Thanksgiving holiday, it appears increasingly inevitable that the 116th Congress will impeach the president for only the third time in American history. The question is, on what timetable will they proceed, given the dwindling number of legislative days and competing priorities up for them?"